Our mom has one just like yours.
Where did you get it?
Same place you did.
A few years sooner, that's all. Somebody kept that room open the whole time. I never found out who.
I kept the lights on.
Yours is letting go. Mom's is holding on.
The bench faced east, so the October sun came up over the cottonwoods and hit it full by 9. Gus Renfro sat there at 9:10, the way he did every second Saturday of the month. That was the day. He had a paper cup of coffee going cold in one hand and a folded receipt in the other, and he was not waiting for anyone. 2 small girls in yellow slickers stopped in front of him. They were identical, down to the same gap in their front teeth. The taller one looked at the old ink on his forearm and pointed. "Our mom has one just like yours," she said. Gus went still. "Before we go on, I'd like to know where you're watching from. These Saturdays tend to start the same quiet way, and it helps to picture who's out there. If the small, unshowy things people do for each other are the kind of story you keep, you might think about staying a while." He looked at the girl. Then he looked at his own arm, where the tattoo had sat for 13 years, an open hand, palm up, a single spark lifting off the fingers, the way an ember lifts off a fire that someone is still tending. It was not a common design. It was not something off a wall in a shop. He had stopped seeing it a long time ago. It was just part of the arm now, the way a scar becomes part of a hand and a man forgets to count it. "Your mom has this one," he said. Not really a question. He wasn't sure what it was. "Not the exact same," the girl said, with the flat honesty of a child who has already decided the adult can handle the truth. "Yours goes up. Hers comes down." Something moved in his chest that he could not name right away, and he had learned, over a lot of years, not to grab at those things too fast. He set the coffee on the slats beside him. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, so he was closer to their height and not looming over them. Old habit, the medic's rule. Don't stand tall in front of a scared kid. Don't loom over a calm one either. "What's your name?" he said. "Etta, that's Josie." Josie lifted 2 fingers off her sleeve in something like a wave, then put them back. "We're not allowed to go past the ducks. This is past the ducks." "It is," Gus agreed. He was 46. He had spent 9 years in the Army, most of it as a combat medic. 2 tours he mostly kept folded up small. Now he fixed bicycles. A nonprofit shop 3 blocks off Tejon rebuilt donated bikes and gave them, free, to kids and to veterans who needed a way to get to work. He was good with his hands and better with the ones who came in broken and pretended they weren't. He had grease worked so far into the creases of his knuckles that no soap had touched it in years. He noticed exits in rooms without meaning to. He stacked things square. None of that was why he came to this bench on the second Saturday in October. He came because of a promise he'd made to a man named Cole Hartley, who was from Colorado Springs, and who was not coming back to it, and who used to say that a bench in the sun was the closest thing to church he trusted. So once a month Gus sat in Cole's church for an hour and let the leaves come down and did not check his phone. It was a small thing. He had never told anyone he did it. Small things a man announces stop being the thing and start being about him. So he'd been up since 5 that morning. He always was. The Army had set his clock at 19 and never reset it. By 6, he'd had the roll-up door open at the co-op and the radio on low, truing a wheel for a kid's bike that had to be ready by noon. The wobble came out under his thumb a quarter turn at a time. It was the kind of work that let a man think about nothing, which was the only kind he trusted before coffee. And by 8, he'd done the other thing. The thing he did every second Saturday. Driven across town, unlocked a low room with folding chairs, set them in a circle, started a steel urn of coffee, put a box of tissues where a person could reach it without having to ask. He never stayed. He'd learned a long way back that he could build the room and just couldn't sit down inside it. Marisol had met him at the door to take the hour, the way she did on Cole's Saturdays. "Go on," she'd told him. "I've got it. Go sit in the sun." So he'd walked the 6 blocks to the park, found Cole's bench empty, and sat. And he had thought about nothing at all, exactly as promised, right up until a small voice put a stop to it. "I keep coming back to that arrangement. The bench, the cold coffee, the folded receipt in his hand, because it would be easy to call what happened next luck. Gus would call it that himself for a while, but nothing on that bench got there by accident, and neither did the two girls, and neither did the woman who was about to come running. "Does yours mean something?" Etta asked. She had crouched now, studying his forearm the way someone studies a map of a place they've already half been to. "It does. Mom won't say what hers means. She says it's a grown-up thing." Etta considered this a personal insult. "We're 7. That's a good age," Gus said. "You can keep a secret at 7. We can. We just don't want to keep hers. We want to know it." He almost smiled. He turned his arm a little so the light caught the ink, the hand, the spark. He'd drawn it himself at a table in a church basement on a bad night, out of nothing but the need to make something with his hands while the rest of him came apart. He'd taken it to a tattoo artist because he needed something on his body that was his own and meant only what he decided it meant. A lot of people had ended up with some version of it on some part of them. Nobody handed it out. People just started seeing it on a wrist, an ankle, the back of a neck, and they understood that person had been where he had been. "Mine's about holding on until help gets there," he said. That was as close to the truth as a kid needed, and it wasn't a lie. The spark's the part you keep going so the next person can find their way to it. Josie, who had not said much, said, "Ours has a bird." "No, it doesn't," Etta said. "On the coat," Josie said patiently, and pointed at the little embroidered duck on the pocket of her own slicker, and the argument moved on to whether a duck was a bird, and Gus let it go and just watched them. Two small people in matching yellow, 7 years old, working something out. There is something almost unbearable in it. Two strangers, years apart, had reached for the very same small shape to get through the worst night either of them ever had. And now the daughters of one of them were standing in front of the other, in the sun, arguing about ducks. "Where's your mom now?" Gus said. Etta straightened and turned and pointed back toward the playground, toward a woman who was already up off a bench 100 feet away, already moving, already covering ground. Fast in the particular way a parent moves when they have lost the sight line to their children for 90 seconds and have run every terrible arithmetic that 90 seconds allows. She was calling something. He couldn't hear the words yet. He could read the shape of them off her. "That's her," Etta said, entirely unconcerned. "She's gonna do the thing where she counts us." The woman reached them at a half run and put her hands on the nearest shoulder by instinct. The checking hand. The "you are here" and "you are whole" hand. Then she looked up to see who her daughters had been talking to. She saw a man in a canvas jacket with grease in his knuckles and a paper cup by his boot. Her face did the thing every parent's face does in that first quarter second, the fast, cold sweep for threat. Then her eyes went to his forearm, and she stopped, all of her, the way a needle stops on a record. "Where?" she said. Her voice had gone strange and quiet under the noise of the park. "Where did you get that?" He didn't answer right away. He was good at not answering right away. It was a thing the Army had built into him, and grief had reinforced. This understanding that most questions get better answers when they're left to sit a second first. "I drew it," he said, "a long time ago. Made the shape up myself on a bad night. Made it up." She said the words back like she was testing whether they would hold weight. "There was a room I used to sit in." He turned his forearm down. The way a person covers a thing they've just remembered is tender. "Why do you ask?" She didn't answer that one. She was looking at the spark lifting off his open palm, and she was thinking about the one inked on her own shoulder blade, the same hand, the same spark, except hers came down. Hers was a hand held out to catch something falling. That was when the man with the lanyard walked over. There was a harvest market setting up along the path, folding tables and crates of pumpkins and a banner. Two teenagers were trying to keep from folding in on itself. The man had a clipboard and the brisk, harried look of someone running late on a Saturday. He took in Gus in one pass, the canvas jacket, the grease in the knuckles, the cold coffee by the boot. "Sir," he said, "this row's for vendors this morning. There's benches down by the restrooms if you need to sit a while." Gus set his cup down and started to gather himself up without a word. He'd heard that sentence, in that exact tone, more times than he could count. He didn't take it personally anymore. He just moved. He's with us, Corey said. The man blinked. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought. I know what you thought. Not unkindly. Just done. He moved off toward the banner. Gus lowered himself back onto the slats. Etta watched the man go with narrowed eyes. He was rude, she announced. He was busy, Gus said. Busy makes people fast. Fast people don't look very hard. I want to sit with that line for a second. Because it's the whole thing, isn't it? Fast people don't look very hard. The man with the clipboard would never know who he just tried to move off a bench. Most of us never do. Corey sat down on the other end of the bench, not because she'd decided to. Her legs had just done the thing legs do when the body needs a moment, and the nearest flat surface is right there. Her name was Corey Maddox. She was 43. She had twin daughters, Etta and Josie, 7 years old, and identical down to the gap in their teeth, and she had spent the last 5 years learning who she was on the far side of a phone call. Sean was a smoke jumper, one of the ones who parachute into wildfires in places roads can't reach, cut line by hand and walk out. He'd done it for 11 seasons, and for 11 seasons, she had been the one who stayed lit. That was the part she never said out loud, the leaving. It happened again and again every fire season, and it never got easier. Sean would get the call and be gone inside an hour. His duffel stayed packed by the door. Because a jumper packs before he's needed. He'd kiss the girls if they were awake. He'd stand a minute over the crib if they weren't. And every single time from wherever they staged him, a tarmac in Montana, a base in Idaho, the tailgate of a truck at the edge of some burning country, he called before the jump. The calls were short, bad reception, always. She'd hold the phone down toward the crib so he could hear the girls breathing. He'd tell her the fire number and the name of the ridge, things she didn't need to know but he needed to say, the way a person sets a thing down so their hands come free. And then, before the line cut out, the same words every time. Not I love you, though that was underneath it. He'd say, keep the porch light on. She always did. 11 years of leaving a light burning against a dark she couldn't see into, so that whatever hour he came home, the house would be lit for him. The July fire he called like always. She held the phone to the crib. He gave her the ridge name. Keep the porch light on, he said. He was good at the work and careful, and the fire didn't care about either. A wind shift, a canyon, a few minutes. The men who came to the house used the word burnover, quietly. The way a person sets something they don't want to drop. The twins were too. They didn't understand the men in the doorway. They kept asking when Daddy was landing, and Corey kept the porch light on for 4 days after they told her, because she could not make her hand reach up and turn it off. Corey did not tell Gus most of that. She told him the shape of it, the way two people talk about grief when they've both carried it long enough to have stopped being scared of the word. She said, my husband and 5 years and fire, and he understood the rest from how she spaced the words. What she'd learned in the years after was that grief is not a thing a person gets over. It's a thing a person gets under, the way a body gets under a heavy load, and finds it can stand with the weight if the feet are set right. But she hadn't found her feet alone. Nobody does. There had been a room, 6 months after the funeral when she was still surfacing at 3A. With her heart going like a fist on a door, a woman from the fire district had slid a card across a table and said, there's a group. Families. It's every Thursday. You don't have to talk. Corey had gone the way people go to things at the bottom, with no expectation, just because standing still was worse. She'd sat in a folding chair in a low-ceilinged room and said nothing for 4 Thursdays straight. Somebody always had the coffee made. Somebody always had the chairs already in a circle. The room was just ready every week, like it had been waiting for her. And on the wall of that room, painted small in one corner, was a shape only found by someone lost enough to be staring at walls. A hand, a single spark. She'd asked once what it meant. An older man in the circle, a retired hotshot, had said, it's the thing we do for each other. You hold on till the next set of hands shows up. The spark's what you keep lit so they can find you. She'd gone out 3 weeks later and had it put on her shoulder blade. A hand, a spark. But she'd drawn her own hand cupped, catching, because that was the truth of where she'd been. She had been the one who needed catching. She had spent a whole life being the one who caught. The steady one, the one who held the household, held the babies, held Sean's fear on fire nights, so he didn't have to. And then the ground had opened, and for the first time, she'd had to let her hands go loose and open, and let herself be the thing that falls. Not weakness, not surrender, just the plainest fact she had ever had to accept, that some loads are too heavy to carry with a closed fist, and a person has to open their hand and let others put theirs underneath. That was what her spark meant, coming down, landing in a palm held up to catch it. She looked at Gus's arm again. His spark went up. His hand was open too, but open to let go, not to catch. Two versions of the same small mercy pointed opposite ways. "Where was your room?" she said. He was quiet a moment. "Colorado, here. Started a long time back. Mine was here too." She heard her own voice go careful. "A grief group. For fire families mostly. Somebody kept it running every week for years." She looked out at the cottonwoods going gold. "I sat in that room for 4 Thursdays before I could talk, and I never once found out who set the chairs up, who made the coffee, who kept the lights on so the rest of us had somewhere to fall apart." Gus didn't say anything, but his hand, the one with the spark lifting off it, had gone very still on his knee. For a moment he didn't move at all. Then he turned the cup a quarter turn on his knee, the way a man does when he needs his hands busy so the rest of him can hold still. "Somebody usually does," he said. "Keep the lights on. There's usually somebody." "There isn't usually." Corey kept her eyes on the trees. "That's the thing I learned at the bottom. There almost never is, and then sometimes there is. And you never once get to thank them." He didn't answer that. He looked out at the cottonwoods going gold and let it sit. Josie came back first this time. She was holding something up in 2 fingers, like evidence. "There's a screw in the grass," she announced. "A little one. Good find," Gus said. "Somebody's bike is missing that." She watched his hand as he took it. The grease worked deep into the knuckles, a pale seam of old scar running across 2 fingers. "Your hands are messy," she said. "Not unkind. 7-year-olds run an audit, not a verdict." "They are," he agreed. "From what?" "Bicycles, mostly. There's a shop where we build old ones back up. We give them to kids who don't have one." He turned the little screw over once. "And to grown folks who need to get to work and can't manage a car." Josie considered this a deeply correct use of a shop. "Do we get one?" "Josie," Corey said, "I'm just asking." He almost smiled at that. And here, while the morning was still light, before it got heavy, is a good place to say it. If a story about the quiet ones who keep the lights on is the kind you'd send to somebody who needs it, go ahead and pass it along. Somebody out there kept a light on for you once. You might not know their name either. The shop pulled at something in him. He thought about the kid who'd come in that spring, 19, maybe 20. Out of the Army 8 months, and out of work about the same. Somebody from the VA office had sent him over. Not for a bike, for something to do with his hands on a Tuesday that wasn't drinking. The kid wouldn't look up. He stood in the doorway with his hood up and his shoulders around his ears and said he didn't know anything about bikes. Gus had handed him a wheel with a dozen loose spokes and shown him how to true it. A quarter turn, then spin and listen. A quarter turn, then spin and listen, until the wobble goes out and the wheel runs silent and clean. It takes an hour. It takes patience. It can't be rushed, and it gives back exactly as much as it's given, and there's nothing in it a 19-year-old with a shut face can't slowly learn to do. The kid came back the next Tuesday and the one after. By July, he was truing wheels for the little one's bikes and teaching a girl half his age how to listen for the wobble. Somewhere in there, the hood came down and stayed down. Gus never said a word about any of it. He'd just kept handing him wheels. That was the whole method. Put a broken thing and a set of hands in the same room, week after week. Keep the lights on. Wait. He'd learned that a long way from here. He'd learned it in a place where the broken thing was a person and the clock was a real one. But it was the same work. It had always been the same work. Corey was watching him. Not the tattoo now, his face. "You were in the service." He looked at her. "I fit hearing aids," she said. 3 days a week out of a little clinic on the east side. You'd be surprised who comes through. She thought of Ray Okafor, who came in every 90 days, 68 years old. 2 tours in a war nobody sent him a parade for. He'd lost the top end of his hearing to a howitzer battery in 1972 and spent 40 years saying what and being called slow for it. The first time she'd gotten his aids tuned right, he'd sat very still in the chair and listened to the waiting room clock tick through the wall, and then he'd said, quietly, that he hadn't heard a clock in 30 years. He hadn't cried, he'd just nodded, the way certain men nod when a thing is too big for the face to hold. Half her caseload was men like Ray, men Gus's age and older who'd done 2 tours of something they didn't discuss, and came out the other side with a body that kept the receipts. She'd learned to read them across a room. The way they sat with a shoulder to the door, the way they went quiet and watchful when a stranger came too close, then talked themselves back down, the way they carried a whole life folded up small and never asked anybody to help hold it. "I know how you're sitting," she said. "You took this bench because it faces the path. You've been counting exits since we sat down." "Army," he said. "Medic 2 tours. Long while ago now." Medic. She let the word rest between them. She could picture it without being told. The hands that were messy now had been something else once. They had gone into the worst moment of a stranger's life and held it together by main force. Pressure on a wound in the dark. A count kept steady when nothing else was. "There was a man who trained me," Gus said, unprompted, which was rare for him. "Rough old sergeant. He used to say one thing over and over till it was the only thing left in your head when everything went loud." He looked at the spark on his arm. "You hold the line till the next set of hands gets there. Nobody bleeds out alone, long as the hands keep coming." "That's what mine means," Corey said softly. She touched her shoulder where the ink was. "The man in my room said almost the same thing. Different words, same idea." "It's an old idea," Gus said. "Older than both of us." They looked at the 2 tattoos then. Really looked. His spark lifted up off an open hand, the hand of someone letting go, passing it on. Hers came down into a cupped one, the hands of someone learning at last to be caught. And that was the whole difference between them. Sitting there in the cold October sun, he had been the hands that showed up, for the man bleeding out in the dark, for the kid with no bike, for a room full of strangers who needed the chairs already set when they walked in, for everyone, for years, without once being asked twice. He had just never learned how to be the one who gets caught. "Who shows up for you?" Corey asked. He didn't answer. He set the cup down on the slats beside his boot, very carefully, like it might spill even though it was empty. Somewhere behind them a kid shrieked with laughter, and a dog crashed through the leaves after a ball. "There was a man," he said finally, "Cole Hartley, from right here, the Springs. We served together." He said it the way a person sets down something they don't want to drop. "He didn't come home. I did. He made me promise a couple of things before that, and one of them was that I'd sit in the sun once a month and not think about anything and let the leaves come down. A breath. So that's this. This is me keeping a promise to a dead man on a bench." Corey didn't reach for him. She'd learned better than that, too. She just said, "It's a good promise. It's a small one." "No," she said. "The small ones are the whole thing. I found that out." He glanced at her, something moving behind his face. "After Cole," he said slowly, "I looked for a place to put it down, the grief. Couldn't find one that fit, so I made one. A room every week. Families of people who fell doing the job. I started it for military, but it grew. First responders, too, after a while. Anybody who lost somebody to the work." He rubbed a thumb over the scar on his fingers. "There was a shape I drew on a bad night. I painted it small in the corner of that room. Folks started taking it with them. On a wrist, a shoulder." Corey had gone very still now. It was her turn. "Mine was fire families," she said carefully. "Mostly. It had grown into other things by the time I got there." She was watching his face. There was a hand and a spark painted in the corner, small. You'd only find it if you were the kind of lost that makes you stare at walls. The park did not go quiet. Parks don't. But something between the two of them did. Gus looked at his own arm, at the shape he'd drawn on the worst night of his life, 13 years ago, in a church basement. From nothing, for no reason, but that his hand needed to make something while the rest of him came apart. He opened his mouth, and then he closed it. There are truths a man doesn't get to say about himself. He has to be caught in them by somebody else. "Lot of rooms use it now," he said instead. "Quiet. Almost even. It got around. It was not a lie. It just wasn't the whole thing. And Corey, who had spent 5 years learning the exact weight of what people don't say, heard the shape of the missing part, even if she couldn't yet name it. She opened her mouth to ask, and a voice called across the grass, bright and delighted and entirely certain. Gus? Gus Renfro. Oh my gosh, it is you. A young woman was crossing the grass toward them, a canvas tote bouncing on one shoulder, one hand already up in a wave. Marisol, Gus said, and something in him shifted, caught somewhere between glad and cornered. I texted you. She arrived a little out of breath. Everybody showed. The coffee urn was being dramatic again, but I bled the valve like you showed me, and it's fine. You can stop looking worried. I wasn't worried. You're always worried. She said it fondly, then turned to Corey with the easy warmth of a person who assumes the whole world is friends already. He is. 13 years running that group, and he still gets there an hour early like the chairs won't unfold themselves. Corey had gone very still. What group? She said. Marisol didn't hear the change in her. She was rummaging in the tote. The one off Cascade. Started Thursdays, years back, Saturdays too, now. Families who lost somebody on the job. Fire, service, all of it. He started the whole thing. She found what she was looking for, a set of keys, and held them up to Gus like proof. Locked up after you left. You forgot these. The park did not go quiet. Parks don't. But Corey heard her own voice from 20 minutes ago come back across the grass, word for word. I never found out who set the chairs up, who made the coffee, who kept the lights on. She looked at Gus. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the keys in Marisol's hand, like they'd given something away that he'd spent 13 years not saying out loud. You, Corey said. It came out barely above a breath. You kept that room. A lot of people kept that room. No, her hand had come up to her own shoulder, to the ink under her shirt, without her deciding it. The Thursday room, off Cascade, low ceiling, fire families mostly, when I came. She was watching his face, and her eyes had gone bright and hard at the same time. There was coffee already made, every single week. Chairs already in a circle. For 4 Thursdays, I couldn't say a word, and every Thursday somebody had set it all up before I got there, so I could just fall apart somewhere that was ready for me. Gus said nothing. That was you. He looked at the keys, and then at the spark on his own arm, and something in him seemed to decide it was done being folded up small. I kept the lights on, he said. Quiet. That part's true. The rest, I set some chairs out, made the coffee. That's all it ever was. Corey's breath went out of her. He turned his forearm up, the spark facing the sky. Same place yours came from, he said. A few years sooner, that's all. I drew it on that wall one bad night, so the next person who couldn't look anybody in the eye would have something to look at. She wasn't in the park anymore. She was back in that low room off Cascade, on the first Thursday, the worst Thursday, 6 months after the men in the doorway. She remembered it in pieces, the way a person remembers the bottom. The girls had been asleep in the double stroller she'd wedged by the door, because she couldn't get a sitter and couldn't stay home either. The chairs were already in a circle when she came in. That was the thing that undid her, though she hadn't understood it then. Somebody had already set the chairs. There was coffee in a steel urn and a stack of paper cups and a plate of grocery store cookies nobody was eating, and it was all just there, ready, like the room had known she was coming and had gotten up early on her behalf. She hadn't said a word that first night, or the second, or the third. She'd sat in a folding chair with a paper cup going cold in her hands and let other people's voices move over her like weather. And every single Thursday, no matter how early she came, trying to beat her own dread, the chairs were already set. The coffee was already made. The lights were already on. She had assumed, the way a person assumes gravity, that it was nobody. That rooms like that just ran. It had never once occurred to her what the truth of it was. That somewhere in the dark before those Thursdays, a man got up and drove across town. That he unlocked a door and set the chairs in a circle for strangers he would never sit down beside. And that he left before any of them arrived, so not one of them would ever have to thank him or wonder who he was. She looked at the man on the bench, at his hands, at the grease worked so deep into the knuckles it had stopped washing out years ago. The same hands that had set her chair, And I have to stop here, because this is the part I keep turning over. He built the one thing that saved her, and he still couldn't say I built it. He could only say somebody set some chairs out. Some people spend their whole lives being the hands under everyone else, and they get so used to it that they forget those hands belong to anybody at all. Corey looked down at his forearm, at the spark lifting up off the open hand, then at the shape under her own shirt she couldn't see but knew by heart. The spark coming down into a hand held up to catch it. His had drawn it first. His had put it on a wall in a corner of a room, small for the kind of lost that makes a person stare at walls. And 5 years later, at the bottom of her life, she had stared at that wall and found it, and taken it out to a tattoo artist and made it her own. Never knowing the man who drew it, had been in the building that morning, setting chairs, making coffee, keeping the lights on, so she'd have somewhere to land. 2 hands, same spark, one let it go. One caught it, and they had been the same spark the whole time. Not coincidence, not fate even, whatever that word is supposed to carry. Just one quiet man keeping a promise to a friend who didn't come home, and the promise reaching further than he ever meant it to. Reaching a woman he'd never met. Reaching this morning a bench. Josie, Etta said suddenly from the leaves. Both girls had drifted back, sensing the way children sense that the air over the adults had changed weight. Etta was studying the two of them, her mother's hand on her own shoulder, the man's arm turned up in the light. "Yours lets go," Josie said, pointing at Gus. Then at her mother. "Mom's holds on." Gus looked at the little girl for a long moment. "Somebody's got to keep the lights on," he said, "till the next set of hands shows up. That's all mine ever meant." Etta considered this with the total seriousness of a 7-year-old weighing a truth. "Mom says that too," she said. "She says nobody falls all the way if the hands keep coming." "Your mom's right," Gus said. His voice had gone rough at the edge. "Your mom's exactly right." Corey pressed the back of her hand quickly against her mouth, once, and looked out at the cottonwoods until she could trust her face again. Marisol, finally reading the room, had gone quiet by the bench, keys still in her hand, watching 2 strangers who weren't strangers realize it. Nobody said anything for a while. The leaves came down. A dog barked somewhere near the ducks. The harvest market went on setting up its tables. The man with the lanyard hauling a crate of pumpkins passed, without a glance. No idea that the 2 people he'd tried to move off a bench had just found the one thread that had been running between them, unseen, for 5 years. "I never got to thank whoever it was," Corey said at last. Her voice was steady now. "I used to think about that. There's a whole part of my life I only got through because somebody I'd never meet kept showing up before me and leaving before I woke up to it." She looked at him. "I didn't think I'd ever get to say it to a face." Gus turned the empty cup once on his knee. "You just did," he said, and then he had to look away, too, out at the gold coming down, because there are some things a man who has spent 13 years being the hands under other people does not know how to do. And one of them, it turns out, is sit still on a bench and let himself be thanked. He didn't have to sit with it long. Josie decided the moment was over. "I'm starving," she said, with the flat outrage of a child who has been patient far past reason. "We've been here forever." 10 minutes, Corey said. "You always say 10 minutes, because it's always true." She wiped her face once quick, and it was a mother's face again, sturdy and dry. She looked at Gus. "There's a truck by the north gate, green chile. Best in the springs if you don't have somewhere to be." Gus looked at the empty cup in his hand. It had been empty for an hour. "I don't have anywhere to be," he said. Marisol left them at the path with a wave and a look she didn't explain. The keys back in Gus's jacket where they belonged. The girls went ahead in the loose formation of children who know the way and feel no need to wait. Gus and Corey followed at the pace of 2 people, in the middle of something they aren't in a hurry to finish. Halfway down the path, a boy, maybe 10 years old, came the other way, pushing a bike with the chain hanging off the sprocket, a look on his face like the morning had personally wronged him. Gus watched him a second. Then he crouched by the back wheel. "Mind if I?" and had the chain seated, and the boy rolling again inside a minute. He wiped his hands on his jeans and said something low that made the kid almost smile, and nodded him back toward whoever he'd come with. He did it without any weight at all. The way a person picks up something a stranger dropped. Then he straightened and came back to Corey's side like nothing had happened. Josie had watched the whole thing. "You fixed his," she said. "Just the chain. Easy fix, Mom." Josie turned around, announcing it to the general public. "He fixes bikes for free." Corey was looking at him, at the grease going straight back into the creases of his hands, where it had always lived. At the man who could not, it seemed, walk through a park one single time without turning into the thing that holds somebody else up. None of it was luck, though from the inside it would always feel like luck. It is worth setting down plainly the way it actually happened. There was a woman at the fire district years back who slid a card across a table to a widow who couldn't sleep. She never followed up. She never knew whether the widow went. There was a room off Cascade with a low ceiling, and a man who came before dawn to set the chairs in a circle and make the coffee and turn on the lights, and then leave before anyone arrived, because he'd found he could build the thing that saves people, but couldn't sit inside it himself. He did that every week for 13 years for a promise he'd made to a man named Cole Hartley, who was from the Springs, and who was not coming home to it. There was a young woman named Marisol who took the Saturday circle that morning, so an older man could keep one small promise on one particular bench. There was a park and a market and a habit, years old now, of setting out the day's unsold produce at closing, free, take what you need. The man who'd started that, the one with the lanyard and the clipboard and the tired Saturday face, had no idea that a broke young mother of twins had fed her girls off that table through one long winter. He'd tried to move Gus off a bench an hour ago. He would never know he'd already been part of this years before any of them met. None of them knew each other. None of them knew they were arranging anything. They were just people being decent in the small, daily, unremarkable ways that turn out, in the end, not to be unremarkable at all. That is the only kind of miracle worth believing in. The kind with 100 quiet hands under it, and not one of them looking for credit. At the gate, the girls stopped to argue about whether green chile was too spicy, which was a debate they had every week and would have forever. Corey glanced at Gus's forearm one more time, the spark lifting off the open hand. "You know," she said, "for 13 years you've been the hands under everybody else, setting the chairs, keeping the lights." She hitched her bag up on her shoulder, the one with the ink underneath. "Maybe it's your turn to let somebody set a chair out for you." He didn't answer right away. He was good at not answering right away. Then he opened his hand, the tattooed one, the one that had spent his whole life letting go, passing things on, and for the first time in longer than he could say, he let it stay open. Not to give, just open, ready maybe to be caught. "Maybe," he said. "I was never any good at that end of it." Etta looked back at both of them, deciding something. "You're slow," she informed them. "That's okay. Mom says the slow ones are the good ones. Your mom," Gus said, "is exactly right." They walked out of the park together into the October light, the cottonwoods coming down gold and unhurried around them, all that quiet arithmetic of kindness, finally adding up to 2 people and 2 girls and 1 green child truck by the north gate. And a spark that had been the same spark the whole time, one hand letting it go, one hand holding it up. Finally, after all these years, meeting in the middle. I keep coming back to the hands nobody counts. The ones that set the chairs and slip out before the room fills, that push a cart across a table and never ask whether it helped, that keep a light burning for strangers they will never meet. The people in this story are invented. The names, the park, the fire, the room are fiction, and any resemblance to a real person is only the resemblance grief has always had to itself. But the rooms are real. So is the particular loneliness of the ones who grieve a long time, who get so used to being the strong hands under everyone else that they forget those hands belong to anybody at all. I wrote this for them, and for the families of the ones who don't come home, there are real hands that stay open. The Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors at TAPS, org for military families, and the Wildland Firefighter Foundation at Foundation, org for the families the fire takes. Nobody bleeds out alone, so long as the hands keep coming. May we all leave ours open. There is no telling whose spark we were meant to catch.